Chutti Mithran. In today's chess video, I'm going to be showing you a chess game that was played by Donald Byrne versus Robert James Fischer. Donald Byrne, who has a white pieces, opens the game with the move knight to f3. The ready opening is on the board, knight to f6 and pawn to c4. So this is known as the English ready opening. Pawn to g6, black immediately commits himself to the development of the bishop. Knight to c3, bishop to g7 and pawn to d4. White gains some space in the center, and here if you play pawn to d5, this enters into the Gruenfeld defense, but Bobby plays some more castles, and after castles he's checking if his opponent will play the move pawn to e4, because if he plays the move pawn to e4 then Bobby has pawn to d6 and this will transpose into the King's Indian, which is a powerful weapon of Bobby's. So obviously white does not play the move pawn to e4, white plays bishop to f4, developing the bishop, pawn to d5, now striking in the center, queen to b3, defending the c4 pawn, d captures c4, and after queen captures c4, black plays the move pawn to c6. If you play bishop to e6 immediately, then white has queen takes c7 ideas. So c6 was played, e4 claiming space in the center and knight b d7. Rook to d1 developing the rook, knight to b6 and queen to c5 was played. If you play queen to b3, then black has ideas of bishop to e6. So after queen to c5, this queen is pretty safe on c5. Bishop to g4, now pressuring this diagonal, and this is the most crucial position of the game. White must play the move bishop to e2, but in this position, Donald Byrne plays a move bishop to g5, and this is clearly not a good move. Pause the video for a few minutes and try to come up with the absolute correct continuation for black. Well, after bishop to g5, Donald Byrne has violated the most important rule in chess: do not move your piece twice in the opening. He has developed the bishop to f4 and now he has developed it to g5. He has wasted a lot of time and Bobby takes advantage of this with the absolute stunning move knight to a4. And this is the idea. If you play knight captures a4, then after knight captures e4, this knight is attacking this queen and this knight is attacking this bishop. So let's say queen to c2. Now this queen is attacking this knight. Black has bishop takes f3 and after g takes f3, knight takes g5. Bishop to g2, he can simply play the move bishop takes d4 and white's position is a complete mess. It will only take black a matter of minutes before he can convert this into a winning position. So after knight to a4, this knight cannot be captured. Queen to a3 was played. Now this knight is under attack. Knight captures c3 and after b captures c3. And in this position, Donald Byrne thought that everything was under control, because if his opponent played the move knight captures c4, he will play bishop captures e7, attacking the queen and attacking the rook. But this is exactly what Bobby goes for. He plays knight captures c4. He is freely giving up this e7 pawn. And after knight captures e4, white must not capture the pawn on e7, but white does not have any useful idea, but bishop captures e7 is the only useful idea. And now, not defending with queen to e8, because after bishop takes f8, black has knight takes c3 ideas. But Bobby Fischer is not one to make unnecessary defensive moves, and he simply plays queen to b6 and is asking, do you want to capture the rook on f8? Well, let's see what happens if the rook is captured. Bishop captures f8, black will play bishop captures f8, attacking the queen. So after queen to b3, rook to e8. Now this rook is putting pressure on this diagonal. Queen captures b6. The sooner you remove the queen, the bigger. A captures b6, bishop to e2. And after knight captures c3, you attack this bishop on e2 and you attack this rook on d2. Rook to d2 and after bishop to b4, even though white is up the exchange, he has no clear continuation, and after the move bishop to b4, let's say he plays h3, black has knight takes c2 and after h takes g4, knight to g3, giving a check, king to d1 and after knight takes h1, black clearly has a full piece up. This will be a completely winning position for black. So let's take stock. So this rook cannot be captured. Bishop to c4, developing the bishop, and here knight captures c3. So once again Bobby is sacrificing a piece. If you play queen captures c3, then after rook to e8, you cannot win the bishop back. For example, you play a move like queen to a3, then black simply can play queen c7, and after castles, bishop takes f3 and g takes f3, black will play queen takes c7, and after rook takes e7, black has 6 pawns, white only has 5 pawns, and not only that, white's pawn structure is a complete mess. He has 4 pawn islands, black only has 2 pawn islands. This will be a completely winning position for black. So after bishop to c4 and knight captures c3, you might be wondering, is there a useful plan for white? Well, no, there is not. But Bobby Fischer's opponent is not one to sacrifice or resign immediately. He plays bishop to c5. Now he's attacking this queen and is attacking this knight on c3. So rook to e8 check, and after king to f1, everyone thought that white was in a completely winning position. Why? Well, after knight to b5, bishop takes f7, king takes f7, queen to b3, you give a check, and after bishop to e6, knight g5 check, king to g8, knight takes e6, and now we are attacking this queen. So after queen a6, white has knight c7, giving a discovered check. After king h8, white will simply play knight captures a6, and this will be a completely winning position for black. Almost all the grandmasters in the world thought that white was in a completely winning position, but in this position, the 14-year-old Bobby Fischer simply makes a stunning sacrifice. Pause the video for a few minutes and try to come up with the absolute correct continuation for black. Well, after king to f1, he simply plays bishop to e6. And let's take stock, friends. First, this bishop is under attack, this knight is under attack, and this queen is under attack. Bobby's opponent plays bishop captures b6. But what happens if you play bishop captures e6? Well, now queen to b5, you give a check, king to g1, knight to e2 check, and after king to f1, knight to g3. If you play king e1, then queen e2 will be a checkmate. So after king to g1, do you see the absolute correct smothered checkmate in 2? Well, it's not too difficult. Queen f1 check. After rook captures f1, knight to e2 will be a beautiful smothered checkmate. Look at this checkmate, friends. So after the move bishop to e6, if you play queen takes e3, then this should have been the absolute correct continuation for white. But you have queen takes e5, and after d takes e5, bishop takes e3, bishop takes e6, and rook takes e6. This will be an advantageous endgame for black. So after all this, after bishop to e6, queen takes c3 should have been the absolute correct continuation, but Bobby's opponent goes for bishop takes b6, bishop takes c4, giving a check, and after king to g1, knight to e2, giving a check, king to f1, and here you can simply play knight c3 check, king g1, and knight takes d1, but this will not be the good continuation because after king to f1, black played the move knight captures d4. And you might be thinking, okay, black is simply winning another pawn. But this has another crucial idea behind it. King to g1 and now knight to e2 check was played. King to f1 and after knight to c3, now you see the idea. King to g1. Now if you play knight captures d1, then white will simply retreat to bishop to e3. So after a captures b6, this is the idea, friends. Queen takes c3 cannot be played because of bishop takes c3. So it was essential that this d4 pawn was removed. Queen to b4 and not knight takes d1 but rook to a4. And you can see how beautifully black's pieces are coordinated. This rook is defending this bishop, this knight is defending this rook, and this bishop is defending this knight. After rook to a4, queen captures b6, now knight captures d1 was played. And you can see that black has a rook and two bishops for one queen. This will be a completely winning position for black. In fact, white can simply resign in this position, but it is always difficult for players who are easily up a queen. After knight captures d1, h3, white wants to play king to h2, and now rook captures a2. King to h2, knight captures f2, removing the pawn and attacking the rook. Rook to e1, and now rook captures e1. Queen to d8 check, bishop to f8, and knight captures e1. Bishop to d5. Now this bishop is putting pressure on this g2 pawn. Knight to f3 and now knight to e4. removing the knight, and this rook is clearly putting pressure on the g2 pawn, queen to b8 and b5. So black is starting to push his passed pawns, h4, and in this position h5. You shouldn't allow h5 and h6. Maybe, just maybe, white can create counterplay, h5 even stopping that, and knight to e5. King g7. So you can see that Bobby is clearly improving his position slightly and slightly, and the threat is bishop to d6. For example, what moves there? If you play king to h3 or knight to d7, for example, bishop to d6, and after queen captures, knight captures d6, white will lose his queen. So after knight e5 and king g7, king g1, removing the king and bishop to c5, giving a check to the king, and now king to h2 must be played, but then black has ideas of bishop to d6. So white played the move king to f1, and now pause the video for a few minutes and try to come up with the absolute correct mate in 6 continuation. Well, after king to f1, knight to g3, giving a check, king to e1, and now bishop to b4 check. King to d1, bishop to b3 check. So you can see that this king is clearly forced to move up this way. King c1, knight e2 check, king to b1 and knight c3 check. King to c1 was played and Bobby simply delivered the final blow with rook to c2 checkmate. He could have played bishop to a3 checkmate. This would have been a clear cut checkmate in my opinion, but after king to c1 he plays rook to c2, and this ends friends the game of the century that was played by Bobby Fischer against Donald Byrne. If you like this video, please comment, share and subscribe. I will be visiting you with more chess videos on opening chess traps, puzzles, endgame strategies very soon, so subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any of my future content. Thank you and have a great day friends.